First story. When the pandemic was still going strong in 2020, I started all sorts of pandemonium. I was working as an Uber driver to make ends meet. Dismissed from my retail position and required the ride-sharing phenomenon and rapid income. You meet a variety of folks during gigs, particularly if you're working late. It was weird on the nights I was there. Strange encounters with inebriated passengers. Discussions, but none of that is comparable to the events of a Friday evening in. It was just after midnight in October. And I had just left a person at a motel close to the town's edge. My app pings nearly instantly with a fresh request. The time of the pickup was approximately 6. In front of a bowling alley a few minutes away. That was a nice strip mall. Typical stuff, according to the ride's name. I took it, Derek, and headed out. When I arrived, the place was silent. Only a few faint lights in the parking lot, the bowling alley and the automobiles in view appeared closed, but a man was there. Standing by themselves beneath one of the lights. He was dressed in trousers and a gray hoodie. Possibly 6 feet 2 inches tall, with his hands in his pockets, head down, as though he was examining his shoes. He glanced at me as I pulled up, but rolled down without moving or waving. "You Derek?" he asked through the window. Nodded, moved gently, and entered. Behind me in the rear seat, I began the journey and inquired as to if the destination in. The app accurately provided an address of roughly 20 minutes away in a house. I had never been to that neighborhood, he stated. Quietly, "Yeah, that's right." I recall thinking his voice sounded not inebriated or intoxicated, but a touch off. Heartless, but I didn't believe. At the time, it was too difficult. He didn't say anything when I started driving. For the following 5 or 6 minutes, anything. Looked in the rearview mirror at him. Occasionally, and each time I glanced, he was looking directly forward, not out of the window or at the rear of his phone. I tried to break the silence out of my thoughts. Inquiring about his night's progress, he just needed to get out, he continued after pausing. "Out of there?" I inquired, and he replied. "Doesn't matter." I decided not to press it. We continued to drive for another 15 minutes or so. I became aware that we were approaching the address, but the destination was in a incredibly remote area of town with no streets. Lots of trees, large yards, and lights As he got closer to the address, he abruptly, leaning forward, he stated, "In fact, you enter that driveway correctly. There." He gestured toward a residence on the. Yes, there were no lights on and the home was dark. It appeared ancient on the inside and, to be honest, it was abandoned and had an overgrown peeling paint on the siding and the lawn. Additionally, there was no vehicle in the driveway. He responded, "Is this your place?" I turned after hesitating, "Just pull in." I pulled into the driveway and stopped next to the and parked the vehicle in front of the home. He didn't leave the park, so I turned to look at. "Everything all right?" he asked him. Murmured, "Wait," as they gazed at the front door. "Here." He then exited and began heading in the direction of the residence he didn't visit. He stepped around the side of the front entrance of the structure and vanished from perspective. I spent about 2 minutes sitting there, attempting to determine what the ride would be. Although officially still in progress, I didn't want to drive away and face consequences, but I had the feeling that things wasn't quite right. Informed me that this man wasn't simply going to. I went inside to get something, but I eventually stopped. Mechanically, I noted the trip as finished and began to retreat from the driveway, but prior to moving in backward, I observed him approaching the car quickly with empty hands, and he had a peculiar expression on his face, such as he was either thrilled or furious when I opened the doors, as I didn't want to turn it into a conflict, but something inside of me was yelling to keep him from returning. He unlocked the back door, entered, and uttered. I said, "Take me to the other place." "Where else?" did he say, "just drive." "Tell me," I said, "you must put it in the app." He simply didn't respond. "Looked at me in the mirror," I repeated. "I am unable to take you somewhere unless you put it in the app." He remained silent. He instructed me to drive after a little while. I didn't want to go to where I picked him up to debate any longer, so I began to go all the way back toward the strip mall. In the car, I sensed this strain. Wasn't speaking, yet I sensed his presence. The strands of hair on my arms were. He got to his feet, still gazing at the back of my mind. I once attempted to defuse the tension. I said, "Rough night." I asked, and he said, "You could say that. Whether everything is okay," and he stated, "Not yet." I stopped asking inquiries upon returning to the strip. I parked in the same light at the mall where I grabbed him, but before I could say anything, he asked, leaning forward, "Are you ever unsure about how you'll die?" I froze, chuckled uncomfortably, and stated, "I don't think it's really something about." He simply leaned without laughing back in his chair, and a few seconds later he said, "I think about it all the time." Then he unlocked the door and stepped outside. He didn't say anything more and didn't end the door immediately. He simply stood there for half an hour in and half out of the vehicle. He then turned to face me and remarked, "You chose the incorrect man for tonight." He closed the door and left to enter the. I sat in the shadows behind the bowling alley, too shaky to move for a minute. Eventually, I drove home all the time. When I came home, I checked my mirrors, reviewed the travel information once more. The name had changed, and something wasn't right. Derek was no longer displayed, it was blank. Name, profile photo, and travel history. The ride seemed to have never occurred. Reported it to Uber support, but I was informed that the trip data was unavailable. They occasionally stated that occurs if the application malfunctions or if the midway through, the rider cancels, but I know what I saw that I knew I had finished the trip. The man entered and exited my vehicle, and I understand what he stated, "You chose the tonight, I saw the wrong guy, who I've never seen before. Once more, and I hope I never do, yet each. When I receive a ping in a poorly lit parking lot or have a passenger who is mute in the. I recall that evening in the back seat, and I recall the sensation that maybe something horrible may have happened. At the last minute, he decided against it. Or perhaps he had no intention of doing anything merely to frighten someone. However, I'm still curious about his meaning and whether he eventually discovered the ideal vehicle. Second story. I was driving in 2021 when this occurred. I work full-time as an Uber driver in a city that attracts a large number of travelers, particularly in the ride-sharing gigs can be respectable in the summer. I worked for money if you're consistent. Due in part to the fact that I'm a night owl and in part because to the reduced traffic and better advice from inebriated travelers returning from the night's bars. This occurred at approximately 1:30 in the. It was a fairly typical Saturday morning. I had just dropped off a bunch of people at college students who were always yelling in the rear of my vehicle, so I was happy to receive a request that appeared more subdued. The Chris's name and the pickup address. Was a tiny backstreet that was just off. The peculiar thing about downtown was that the pin was in a rather strange location away from any bars or flats closer to the rear. Quite an old strip mall, but I reasoned that perhaps it was simply a poor GPS marker. Occasionally occurs. I drove by and noticed the man in the corner wearing a hoodie. I grabbed his jeans as he looked down at his phone. Said, "Chris." He nodded and received. Without saying much, he stood at the back. Didn't slur his words or smell like booze. In his words, he appeared sober and simply. Silently, he didn't greet anyone or speak. Response when I inquired about his night. Going, some individuals simply don't talk, so I began the process without giving it much thought. Ride, with the drop-off location being on the 25 minutes away on the other side of town. I had visited a suburban neighborhood. Perhaps a couple of times prior to the thing becoming. The roadway was completely dark. Some places have rather solitary lighting. Observed approximately 5 minutes into the journey. Chris was using his phone, but he wasn't phoning or texting anyone, but flattening it in his lap while using the flashlight turned on, only illuminating the beam. I questioned, looking up a little bit toward my seat. He was half joking, sort of, "Everything all just back there," he muttered. "Yeah." Then the flashlight was turned on. The following 20 minutes were completely quiet. Except the engine's hum and an odd, I don't know, anxiety is rising in the car. How do I put it? It was just a feeling. Off about this man not being dangerous, but definitely not as calm as he was. Indeed, we arrived to the neighborhood. Then I went to the house using the GPS, but when we arrived, I saw that it was completely no porch light, no interior lights, and it is dark. I questioned, "Is this right?" but got no response. Location. Chris sat without responding. I turned around and gave him a glance. I said it again, a bit louder. He looked behind me and asked, "Hey, is this it?" The window, and I said it again. While, and he nodded at last, so I placed the "Have a good day," he remarked, parking his car. "Night." He sat there without moving. I then repeated, "Are you good?" to him. At last grabbed the handle and left without shutting the door behind him. He simply waited outside the vehicle with the I sat there with the door open, facing the home. After a few seconds of waiting, 20 and then for a full minute, I was on the verge of spoke up when he abruptly turned. Gazed at me through the open window. "I need to go back," I remarked, opening the door. He responded, blinking, "Back where?" His tone was, "Where you picked me up." Flat, emotionless, and unsure of what. That was a 25-minute drive, and I couldn't just go back and change the I informed him that he would need to ask for a new ride, but all he did was look at me. Pleaded with me, "Please, I have to leave." Back. I reiterated to him, "You must ask for it using the app." At that point, he said something that made me shiver. "I can't," he responded, "because they're still there. Yet. The only thing I could say is, who's not gone?" He simply didn't respond. Held the door open while standing there. And I saw that his breathing was labored. I then began to get quite uneasy. I answered, "Look, I cannot simply begin a new journey without you. Ask for it." He gazed for a second, then gradually withdrew and shut the door and proceeded to the house despite the fact that it was completely dark and appeared vacant, so I waited for him to. Before I took off the moment, the porch I turned the corner where my journey came to an end. The app and began making their way back toward. I stopped a few blocks south in downtown to utilize the 24-hour petrol station. I parked at the restroom and grabbed a drink. Side of the structure entered and returned perhaps 4 minutes later. And while returning to my vehicle, I felt my brain seemed to have short-circuited. Chris was occupying the same rear seat. Hoodie and the same look. I believed I had gone inside after locking the doors. However, he was near the rear of the. I opened the driver's side door of the vehicle and slowly retreated while maintaining vigilance over. How did you get him through the mirror? I asked him back in, and he just replied, take me. Return. I said, I'm phoning the police and grabbed my phone. At that moment, he leaned forward sufficiently near me to. They're still there, he murmured, hearing his breath within the home. I'm not sure why, but I did not make a police call regarding. His words gave me the impression that he was experiencing an episode of some sort. Complied and uttered, whose house is? I said, that, and he replied, my parents'. Asked him if he resided there, and he replied, no. No more. The hair stood up on my neck. I began to drive slowly back to where I gave him my entire being. Was yelling at me to stop, but I didn't. As we drew nearer, he didn't know what else to do. Began to breathe more heavily and rocked. At one point, it was somewhat in the back seat. They're still there, he muttered. Won't leave despite my efforts. When we arrived at the residence, there are still no lights and no indications of anyone living there. He left without saying anything before approaching the front door and remained there without knocking or anything. He simply stood motionless as I waited. Perhaps 30 seconds, then withdrew once more, ensuring that the doors were securely locked. Parked beneath a street and drove 3 blocks. Light and spent 10 minutes sitting there, attempting to comprehend what has just transpired. I considered phoning the police, but what would? I even claimed that a man entered my vehicle twice and made strange remarks, but there was no criminal in theory, as far as I was aware, so I didn't sleep that night and just drove home. I reported the ride that night and the following day to Uber, and to be honest, I was sorry I didn't. Calling the police to report this because the man may have had a mental illness. I hope he didn't hurt me, but I need help. Does anyone know whether that house was actually the home of his parents, or if he was merely experiencing a manic episode? Third story. I'm a girl of 18 who lives alone. I live with my dog in my flat. Getting food because it's 8 miles out of town delivered may occasionally be a pain. I had never considered Uber Eats. You could hear some stories about wicked people, but never assume that you will experience them at least that's what I believed it to be. On Friday night, I was tidying up preparing my apartment for my lover to visit. We live far away, so I see him only on the weekends, so I typically make an effort to clean it up beforehand. He comes on Saturday, and I've been. After around 2 hours of cleaning, everything was. I felt hungry because it was beyond 6 p.m. Wanted to avoid scrubbing any dishes because I simply cleaned each one of them and I choose to order dinner in the kitchen, so I wouldn't have to mess up what I asked for my meal and received the message that the motorist was en route and operating I'm a young girl with a white Honda Fit Sport. I live alone, therefore I get my delivery directions to deliver my purchase to I was at the door for contactless delivery, watching TV while seated in my living room, when I received word that my food Was sent as soon as I received that. Alert, I leaped to my feet, eager to receive my. I was hungry as I opened the. There was no door to get my food, so. Perhaps he pronounced it incorrectly, I thought. Door while glancing down at every door. They didn't have any food there, so I returned and prepared to send a message. Suddenly I heard someone knock on my door. He was my neighbor next door. He said, "Hey, I'm sorry," while holding my food. "Retrieved your meal from the delivery driver," since he was examining windows, and I had no idea what he was doing. I thanks and accepted the food. He was wondering, what the hell just occurred. I returned, ate my meal, and watched a film when I first began to. I showered and got ready for bed. Should switch off my television and ensure that all of my. Before I went to bed, the doors were locked. I called my lover as I was lying in bed. Ultimately found myself dozing off. Up several times during the night in order to. Whether it's the window or the. My dog doesn't have a lot of fear. Even though he weighs only 5 pounds, it's still. When he growls at something, it's quite frightening. And surprises you. I've finally gotten. He should relax and return to his slumber. I woke up not even 15 minutes later. Up to my window being pounded. My dog began barking uncontrollably. I was unable to whimper or even snarl. I got into my bed, grabbed the sheets, and simply left after pulling them over my head. Sufficient to keep my eyes open so I might. I phoned the cops to look at the glass, and muttered softly into the phone. Informed the operator that someone. I have a backyard, however my window doesn't lock to make it simple to raise. She instructed me to move to another room and the police will soon arrive at my residence. I sprinted to the kitchen and picked up a knife. Awaiting the sight of red and blue lights. Or listened to sirens, it seemed like forever. Glanced out my kitchen window and I never anticipated seeing what I did. The Uber driver's vehicle that brought my meal. His vehicle was parked on the other side of the road. As soon as you open the door from my flat, there's a big open space leading to my apartment. The field on the left is utilized for allowing dogs to play and parking trailers. I didn't see him, but he was parked there. I put 2 and 2 together, anyone in the car. Together, and I reflected, he's in my backyard. At last, the police showed up. I was shaking so much that I could hardly speak. And sobbing, I told one officer what took place as the other headed to look at my backyard, where I have. The officer's bedroom window is another. Proceeded to inspect his vehicle after arriving because it was not in the field, yet he was still there. The 2 officers returned to his car and began conversing with the policeman. I was talking to her and informing her of footprints that were found in my backyard. Simply rained the previous evening, so it was. It was so muddy outside that I began to fear. I heard that once, not only because you don't want to hear it, but moreover, where was this man if he didn't return with the police officers arrested? And my neighbor arrived without being in his car. Outdoors to observe what was happening in there. Officers gave him an explanation of what was occurring, after which he talked about how he collected my food earlier that. The neighbor asked me to sleep that day, spending the night at his residence if. Strangely, it helped me feel better. Declined the offer, and after the police left, I returned to my flat. I took a few since I thought it was over. Hours to become sufficiently comfortable to fall asleep, but I woke up at 2 a.m. too. I heard someone knocking on my front door. This cannot be happening, cops. I thought to myself, I got up right now. and approached my front door, afraid to open it. It was the woman I had previously spoken to. She clarified that they remained at my hidden flat to keep an eye out for that person. Just in case he returned, and he did. They saw him approaching my front door, believing he would attempt to discover a path in my heart that led to my. I felt sick to my stomach when she said that. She then clarified that he had been arrested, and I no longer need to be concerned about him. Thanked her and returned to attempt to. Unfortunately, I was unable to fall asleep. This time, I'm sleeping in. Fourth story. I was a male who was 26 years old at the time. On a kind of vacation in Washington, D.C. I'll call my ex-fiancée when I visit her. For the sake of the narrative, Sarah, I was attending a graduation celebration she was hosting. It was a significant event for her basic training. For her relatives, and she requested that I be for it, so I figured, why not? Purchased a plane ticket so that I could be there. Arriving almost a week ahead of the other. Her family in order for her and I to have some time spent alone with me before she would be occupied with her entire family. She stayed there for the occasion. I was at my hotel at the time and ultimately, we made the decision to leave. Then investigate some of the surrounding historical locations that Washington needed to offer. Naturally, I had never been there, so I was intrigued by the concept, and we determined to carry it out after we reached our site, where we walked for around 4 hours. Strolling around and taking in every scene from the Lincoln Monument to the Washington. The Congress building is a monument, and even the White House was a lot of fun. Thrilling event for me to witness. All of these locations that I had overlooked. Taking a high school field trip to. Sarah appeared to visit them at the time. Appreciate that I'm also interested in them. And we had a great time following. Ultimately determined that we had had enough strolling. And were prepared to head back to the. We called a motel using the Uber app. Ride that we had taken to get here earlier. And encountered no problems, so we chose to simply. Sarah, use it once more for the way back. Used her phone to make the request while I waited while sitting in some shade. Was somewhat worn out from the amount of walking we did, and I sensed that my body was getting ready to return to the hotel for a lengthy stay. Eventually needed a snooze after around 10. After waiting for some minutes, an automobile arrived in front of us by the roadside. Sarah gestured to me, "This is the vehicle," since the location where they halted was not a parking space or an area where a vehicle would simply quit on its own. I got up, and accompanied her to the vehicle, where she unlocked the rear entrance and entered, inquiring. "Uber for Sarah?" the man asked, and he gave a small nod without uttering a word. Therefore I accompanied her into the vehicle and closed the door behind me. Now observing this, I came to see how foolish she and if I had been doing this, we ought to have requested the identity of the driver and confirmed the vehicle matched the one shown on the app. None of this was available to me. She and I made the request on her behalf. Phone, so I didn't really think about it at the moment to carry out any of these. As we were seated at the rear of the vehicle, the driver of the gray-colored minivan didn't talk to us. I thought this was a little stranger than any other driver I've ever experienced. Would at least welcome me when my name was submitted or verified, yet this. He started driving without anything, dude. Recognizing either of us in any way other than. He nodded in response to Sarah's question about whether he was our Uber driver, and I did observe how it seemed strange, but I was too exhausted to truly feel like attempting to interact with the man himself. I reclined my head and I closed my eyes and heard someone tap on. Sarah took my arm after what seemed like. After just 5 minutes of driving, I opened my eyes and glanced in her direction, but she didn't talk to me. I could see the expression on her face. Face seemed worried, and that made me pondering the specific issue that worried her. She then gestured to her phone, which displayed the Uber's route would cost to transport us back to our lodging. I quickly came to the realization that our current course was not the best one. According to the route, it was actually I could see Sarah's face in the opposite direction quickly drain with color after her phone showed a notice stating that our Uber had arrived. Then the driver sent a message inquiring where. My heart fell into the bottom of my stomach. It was, and I became aware of how stupid I didn't check the vehicle, and before we both hopped in, the photo on Sarah's mobile device did not match the driver within the app. And I was aware that we had gotten into a circumstance that I gradually turned back to the driver, but I remained silent. Was unaware of this man's motivations or what he could do, and to be honest, I didn't want to learn that. I simply knew that I needed to get Sarah, and I got out of that automobile together. Leaning over, I informed the man that we had decided to change our views and would be alright being escorted outside, where we were in and try to remove us from the circumstance without frightening the man with our knowledge. He looked over his shoulder at me. Mirror in the first real recognition of us that he had provided since we got into the car, and I saw his look as he looked at me silently. In what seemed like minutes, a word was. He probably didn't stop for 10 seconds. The vehicle, but he remained silent in reaction to me and simply continued to drive the vehicle as though I hadn't said anything. My tolerance was at an end, and I knew what. This man didn't have a decent plan for us. I then took the only action that sprang to mind of that instant and extended into my taking my pocket knife out of my pocket. The blade was flipped out, and without. I told the driver without spending any more time. I am aware that you are not our Uber driver. I'm not sure what your strategy is here or what you believe you will do to us. But if you don't pull, I'll take your knife. This automobile over, I don't currently have any issue with it. The driver's eyes rapidly gazed at me once again in the rearview mirror. I knew he could see the knife in the mirror. Firmly grasped my hand, he swiftly stopped the van, and I could hear Sarah and I wasted no time in unlocking the doors. In exiting that vehicle as quickly as when we were both out, could. The man drove off, but we hurriedly stopped to assemble since Sarah was having a panic episode, and I was still. I'm trying to figure out what the hell just occurred. Sarah hastily withdrew her phone and answered our real Uber driver and let him know about our address and requested that he come pick. The real driver showed up within a short while, and this time we informed him that it was the correct one. All that had occurred, and it was. Afterward, he told us something that caused my veins to get chilly. Informed us that there had been several incidents in recent years where individuals were pretending to be local Uber drivers, since it was a simple method to locate a lot of tourists and those who are not local residents that would not hesitate to simply get believing it to be a lift or getting into a car. Apparently, a lot of people had used Uber absent, and they were only able to presume at worst. He said that we were both fortunate because observed when we did, but we hadn't received farther than our previous location retrieved, which was most likely the lone The man's explanation for letting us go, and naturally. We succeeded because I was armed. Returned without incident to the hotel, and we promptly informed the police about it. Provided the most accurate account of the man and the vehicle that both of us could drive, and the police promised to call us if they had any details they could discover that we never received a response from them. Thus I believe the man was never apprehended or located, and that I'm concerned that he might still be out there doing this to other people once more. Discovered how foolish we were both after all of this without confirming whose vehicle it was we were entering, but let's use this as a reminding everyone who is listening to simply that consistently check your Uber drivers and make sure you're always conscious of your surroundings.